Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel. I've got a great guest with me, which is good because I was just saying to her, I'm just back from holiday, so I've been a bit down. So it's good to have Julia with us to talk about her work with Hug-a-Bug, which is a name I love. She works with kids, of course she does, with something called that. I used to be a nurse, so it's going to be great to have her contributions this evening and sort of learn all about her work. Just to say, it's not a live show, but it would be great to hear from you. So if you're watching this, wherever you're watching it and whatever time, do send us a message. We'll pick them up. Or you can WhatsApp me on 07 506 319 745. If you've got any questions for Julia, I'll pass them on to her. I'm sure she'll be delighted to answer your questions. With that said, that's enough of me. Hi, Julia. Welcome. Really good to have you on.
Thanks so much, Noel. It's really good to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, same here. Same here. So you started out where did you? I'm trying to place your accent actually. Where's that?
You see. Okay, so I was born in Liverpool, but brought up on the Wirral, on Merseyside, And is that what you can hear? Is that what you
I
can
think
hear?
so. Yeah.
Okay. So to actually, in the time, quite elderly parents for the day, actually, for the time. And I have a brother and happy childhood, I have to say, happy childhood. But the funny thing is, now when I think back to it, I can see how there were certain things because I had maybe older parents that maybe as I grew up, I was maybe quite mature for my age, always quite, what could I say? I would never like to be in trouble, put it that way. So I was a bit of a goody two shoes. And yeah, like that, but that's probably a bit me anyway. And then I always wanted to look after people. And as I think about 11-year-old, 12-year-old, I would take the next door neighbour's baby out for a walk, which she was always grateful for. Loved animals, just I suppose had that side to me.
Where did that come from? Was that just you were born with it, or was that a family thing, or was it a community thing?
The caring side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, mum's half Irish and was a very loving person. And I think growing, and also my mother's mother lived with us. So both of them were very nurturing, very loving, very caring. But my father actually was quite emotionally detached, actually. And I only can think now of it and look at him probably a little bit more analytical. But he was an only child. He obviously the time was the war and things like that. Very, very bright. He spent the 3 years in the last class at school. He was a member of Mensa. He had all this sort of ability from the academic side, but emotionally was quite repressed. And you come across that more and more, particularly in my line of work as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it was quite common, particularly for guys of that generation. Did he serve in the war, or did he just grow up in it?
Yes. No, he did. He did serve in the war, yeah. He was an engineer in the war, yeah.
Things like trauma responses and stuff like that, and which I think a lot of guys had at that time that was undiagnosed. And it was interesting. I don't know if you've seen this, but there was like looking at the divorce figures post-war was one of the highest levels of divorce because a lot of the guys returning from the forces were just impossible to be around.
Yeah.
Because of the sort of damage being done to them that they carried back with them.
Yeah, and I think also that's relevant today as well. Noel, from the forces and what they've experienced and what they've seen, incredibly difficult to deal with. Incredibly, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And my stepfather was Alf was he drove tanks in the war, which as a little boy I thought was amazing.
Yeah. Yes.
I bet it wasn't amazing while you were doing it, right? So he was in North Africa fight. I only discovered it. This was very common for guys of that generation, and maybe still for a lot of guys now. They never talk thing, right? But I only discovered that he did this because I was reading Spike Milligan's autobiography. And Spike, obviously, he wrote those two wonderfully funny but also tragic books about his experiences. I don't know if you've read them.
I haven't, but I know he suffered as well, didn't he? Really, with his mental health and
quite
at times. Yeah, and I think when I look back at my father's presentation, sometimes, without a shadow of a doubt, he would withdraw,
right,
and we didn't really quite understand why, and we related to it. Oh, it's just one of Dad's moods.
yes.
And he would take himself off, and he really didn't want to be part of the family at all. And when I think back about it now, I think to have the ability and then not for that to be acknowledged, I think was such a key thing for him. So he's in the last class of school for 3 years, but in that time, in that era, that's where he stayed, and yet he couldn't progress.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you then grow to think, well, am I good enough, or do I have that ability, or shall I strive for more? But because you're held back, you don't, and so you minimize your potential.
I wonder also maybe if as a little kid that also contributed to your sense of wanting to heal, because there's this strange man called your dad who has these strange things, and all kids are egocentric, right? So we ourselves for these types of things and want to fix them and all that sort of stuff.
Well, one of the things that had quite a profound effect on me was when I said to both my mum and dad and said, well, I've applied to be a nurse. Wanting, which I got from my mum, oh, that's great, that's, all that sort of like, yeah, you're going to do this, would be great. My dad said, yeah, right, I'll give you 6 weeks. And I went, he said you can't stand the sight of blood. And I went, what's that got to do with it? But he said a lot. And I thought, well, he almost was doing, though, to me what he had done to him. In other words, well, you might want to do this, but you're not going to be able to. And anyway, I proved him wrong. So that was the best way, wasn't it?
But it's also, one wonders whether that was his self-talk as well. That's what was going on inside his own head about himself, himself, he was a failure. Which again, I think a lot of guys from that era did have that type of self-talk. Because they were highly broken and traumatized and had really difficult experiences, and nobody was explaining to them, the stuff inside your head isn't fact.
Exactly. And I know we'll talk later about this, but internal dialogue, what you say to yourself, this is why Hugabug Worlds.
Exactly.
Do something, but so important.
You as a kid, you wouldn't have known this. And I wonder also whether the part of the caring instinct was your community as well, because there is a myth about Liverpool and Merseyside, I don't know if this is true, about a strong community that looks out for each other, cares for each other. Is it real? Is it true?
It is true, and it is real. And I do think, I know people go the north-south divide, but trust me, when I came down here
from the Midlands, so I'm on both sides.
Okay, I'll forgive you for that then. But no, I think we have my experiences from Northern people, a relaxed, easy, friendly way of being with others. So when I came down to the South, I'm just myself. Just myself, and I go, come on, just walk past me, get in a lift and say, hi, how are you? And you look back at you going, yeah, right, who are you? Sort of thing. And it's just, okay then. But,
start talking to people on the tube, they'll start police, right? We've got some weirdo here, there's a problem with them.
She's talking to me and I don't know her. I know, but, anyway, each to their own, Noel, each to their own.
But there is, I guess, a sense of community spirit and wanting to help and wanting to heal. So you went to school, though, I guess, and
yes.
What was that like for you?
Oh, well, I got caught up in when they did that three-tier system. So I was in primary school, then they had the middle school, and then you had to move on again into the senior school. And I loved the middle part. Music is a passion of mine. So I played the piano. I was quite sporty as well. So as you grow with those things, it gives you a sense of achievement and a sense of identity as well. Then came the grammar school, and I felt completely lost. When I went there, I really was completely lost. And I didn't want to do music. I didn't want, it was like, no, I'm not doing any of this, and it did affect me more so than I actually realized, because I didn't know how to deal with it at the time. Had all this known environment where I obviously felt comfortable, and then you get to this big school and you're like in no man's land. And it affected me a lot, actually.
It did. And did it affect your sort of performance at school? I guess it must have done. How were the sort of results for exams and stuff like that? The sort of
It did. I mean, when we came sort of the O-level stage and things like that, well, we're talking about, we're on well-being and mental health issues, and I actually don't mind sharing this because it is very personal, but it affected me because of what we're just talking about now in terms of the exams and everything else. But I had a very traumatic experience when I was 14 and a half.
okay.
Somebody I knew, somebody at the time was relevant to the church that I was going to. And there was an abuse factor to this.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for that. Yeah.
And yet I tried to cope with it in the best way that I could. But what was very evident was really when the exams came out, was just how much it had affected me.
Oh, of course.
And that in itself made me feel, God, I thought I was better than this. I thought I would have, because it was like, well, you're in the top class at school sort of thing. So there you go again, expectation. But it's not that I wasn't capable, but something on an emotional level had really affected me. And I didn't have the resources as a teenager to deal with it.
I just want to stop the conversation a little bit. So if people are listening and are being triggered because something unpleasant is happening to them, and this is reminding them, it's really important to understand, folks, that you're not alone and that there's help out there. Julia and I are of a similar looking generation, I think.
Yeah, well, the 1960s. I think you're younger than me now.
I think I might be older than you, mate. So 67 I was born, and I'm you're around about that same age, aren't you? So
yeah.
So in our generation, there definitely wasn't the help, and you've been listened to, and we're going to come to that bit of the conversation in a minute.
Okay.
But you will be now if you're a kid, or even if you're an adult and you've never talked about this to somebody. If you're a kid, certainly you're experiencing something unpleasant. If an adult is asking you to do things that make you feel bad about yourself, you're really, really, really important, kids, that you reach out and ask for help. There's organisations like Childline, for example, and we'll make sure we put the number up there. And you can go and talk to them confidentially. Now, often when children are in that situation, the person doing it to them will tell them that something bad will happen to mum or dad, or something bad will happen to them. It's not true. Nothing will happen to you, and nothing bad will happen to mum and dad or your brothers and sisters or anybody that you care about. Only things will happen by reaching out. It doesn't matter who you talk to, whether it's a teacher, your parents, a friend's mum and dad. Get an adult involved who you trust.
Yes.
And go and get help for it, and go and talk to somebody about it. If you're an adult listening to this and it's bringing back memories of you not being listened to as a child, there are groups and organizations that specifically exist for survivors. I'm not going to list them all, but you can think about things like Rape Crisis, for example, a great organization that will help you. The Samaritans, if you're feeling bad about yourself and you feel like you're going to hurt yourself because you have these thoughts, and these thoughts can lead us to think about hurting ourselves, and that's perfectly normal. Don't worry about that. Then reach out to the Samaritans, have a chat with them, and they'll help give you, signpost you in the right direction. I'll make sure that James is puts out numbers and organizations and links as well. But it's really important, folks, that you don't deal with this on your own, because we're just about to find out what happens if you try and deal with it on your own as a kid, because Julia's going to tell us about that. So I hope people understand that we're going to share this because we're going to encourage you not to do what Julia did.
Yes.
Our own. So what happened? Did anybody notice that suddenly you were struggling, Julia, or?
Well, funnily enough, looking back again, and also I must say that probably as a result of that, and going into nursing, being extremely interested in the medical side, I read so many self-help books. I tried to work out so much about myself, and that's maybe just an inquiring mind, or I'm quite analytical, but I needed to understand. And therefore, that's the route that I went. But when you say, was there a fallout? Yes, there was. But I didn't realize it was related to that incident at the time. So there was probably, I don't know whether it was 6 months or maybe, I can't actually remember the length of time, but I could not stop eating. I couldn't stop eating. I just had to eat and eat and eat through the night, all the day, even things that I didn't like. And obviously I was putting on weight and all this sort of thing.
And response for children, isn't it? Either avoiding food and becoming anorexic, or overeating are really very common responses to traumatic and frightening sort of childhood events. So
very much so. And as we know, I mean, the stomach is such an emotional organ. It feels everything. And when there's a void and there's like a big hole there inside you from an emotional perspective, you want to fill it. Well, I literally was. I mean, to be eating in the middle of the night and it was like I just couldn't get enough. I went to the GP and I said, look, I can't stop eating. And he said, well, if you don't stop eating, you're just going to carry putting on weight then, aren't you? Well, okay then. So there wasn't even him triggered by thinking, why is she doing this? Whereas at least I think in this now, we're so much more aware that eating styles, if you like, do have a strong emotional can-do factor to them. So what did I do? I went in the opposite direction, and I thought, right, okay, then I don't want to get any more weight, and I'll go on a diet. And I did, and I lost all the weight, and somehow I say came out the other side. But did I, though? That's the question I ask now. Did I come out the other side, or did I
think it's interesting. I think we need to celebrate the fact that people survive. And survival is, a great skill and something that's really important. And you survived, certainly. Did you thrive from it? Unlikely. Did you learn at that point useful skills in terms of being able to have insight and healthy ways of coping? Probably not. In retrospect, definitely you've used the experiences, you've transformed them as an adult, haven't you, in terms of becoming a caring professional, you're training as a therapist, and the fact that you're helping children now, and you were a child who wasn't helped.
Yes.
George, so that's a total transformation of that story, isn't it? So
yes.
It happens, I think. And certainly identify with it, having come from a troubled childhood and then working with children now who are in troubled childhoods and helping them transform it. But I wouldn't encourage people to have a troubled childhood. I think you can become a really good therapist without it.
Yes, yes,
it's not necessary.
No, it's not. It's not necessary at all. But when you say, and yes, and I am a survivor, and I am proud of that within me, because I think that as a result of that event, shall we call it, I was quite a dependent person, and probably quite fearful.
Yeah.
Fearful to be on my own. In fact, I would say a lot, until that, I don't want to be on my own. I can't cope on my own. Where in actual fact, I have survived, and hopefully using it to the good
Clearly,
of others.
you absolutely don't be silly. Of course you do. There's no hopeful about it. But definitely using it to good.
Yeah.
But it's that I wonder what you think about this, because certainly my experience personally and professionally is that we can stay stuck in survival mode a bit too long, and that's not necessarily a good thing. At some point we need to learn to switch that off, because we're not under the same threat.
Oh yes,
even as adults we can be in this survival mode from things that happened as a child.
yes.
And it's appropriate, it's not useful and not for us. So
well, you say that, Noel, in terms of it isn't useful maybe on one level, but that survival mode on another level sometimes leads you to the negative coping mechanism, doesn't it? So you sort of almost need it sometimes to cope.
Day to day, yes.
Yeah, and then but you don't know how to cope without that survival mechanism constantly being on red alert, so to speak.
I think about, like, I used to work on locked wards in my early days of my career in mental health.
Yeah.
I was the person that could deal with the crisis, because what I did as an unhealthy survival mechanism was I disassociated. So I felt nothing and I was just intellectual.
Yeah.
So if a situation kicked off on the ward, I was the one who shut down, no feelings, and I could sort of like organize everything and think about everything. It would be hours afterwards that I'd be terrified and sort of and things like that. But actually, in the moment, it was a useful skill to have.
Yeah.
And I became known as that person that you could rely upon in an emergency.
Yeah.
When my mum told me she was dying of cancer, she said, I want you to organise the funeral because you're the only person who'll remain calm. It's like, yeah.
It's you know what's going on inside. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can so relate to that with my sorry, no.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, with that, going into that mode of, right, get this sorted, let's, and you go into, now you could say, well, you've been a nurse, so you're used to emergency situations and you just go into that mode. But when you're dealing with your daughter and she is on the edge of dying, and you go into that, right, we need this and this, and afterwards you're in it, you sort it all out, you get what needs to be done, you get them into hospital and everything else, and then someone says to you, I don't know how you do that, because you just went in as if it was a job, like a job. You do, but
swings and roundabouts in terms of, and there's consequences, I think, is the reality, is that maybe we should be overwhelmed at times and unable to cope. Maybe that is the healthy response, that I just don't know how to do this. Will somebody do it for me?
Yeah. Yes. And that's I know exactly what you mean. And I think you're so right, Noel, that you have to look after yourself, and there has to be some self-care, and you have to be able to say no, and you have to say, do you know what? I can't cope with this anymore. I need time out, and not feel guilty about it.
I'm not jealous of people who can do it without having to think about it. I have to say, people who can just not cope. It's like,
well, yes, maybe that's a choice not to cope, Noel, because I think there might be an element of that going on.
She says, oh,
wait, I think there might be, but for some, maybe, for some.
So this is really interesting stuff. Thank you, Julia, for being so open and honest about your experience. It's really, really great. And I'm sure people are resonating with it. And because this stuff around, adverse childhood experiences, etc., which is what we're talking about. We now call them ACEs, don't we?
Yeah.
But it swings and roundabouts always. It has an impact, but we shouldn't really just simply have a black and white narrative around it. Of course, there's a legacy from childhood experience, both positive and negative. And of course, as adults, we can transform negative experience into positive things. And of course, these experiences shape our personalities. Like you brought up the question of, did I become a nurse because I'm good at crisis, or did being a nurse teach me to be good at crisis? Well, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other is probably, that's the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
We shouldn't over pathologize anything, but we should also be aware that there are skills and resources that we have from psychological therapies now that never used to exist. Really can help people. We can help people with new ways of thinking and being. So you become a nurse.
Yes.
You do a nursing career, you're dealing with all these tragedies and traumas, as well as beautiful and wonderful things, of course. At some point, you decide to become a therapist. I'm a bit unclear about that, or sort of what that experience, what brought you to that point?
Well, even as a nurse, I was always interested in the person,
right,
how they were feeling, the thoughts they had, their background, everything about them, really. I would, in those days, get told off for sitting on the bed, holding somebody's hand, and just, comforting them. Because, yes, they might have had an operation, there might have been some pain, but it was more than that. It was about giving someone that emotional comfort and lessen their fear and lessen their anxiety just by holding their hand and talking to them and giving them some time and making them feel they matter. So I've always also been very interested in neuroscience and how the brain works, and how we as people develop from that neural pathway, if you like. So the reason I went into counselling was because of the interest was there. Like I said before, I had delved deeply into self-help. Like you, Noel, I had been accused over the years of intellectualizing my emotions.
Yeah.
And I know that
the accusation was absolutely accurate, without doubt.
Well, I suppose you could say, yeah. It's like, probably because the fear of feeling them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think, oh my God, I'll never get up again. If I start to really feel what I feel, that will be it.
I didn't know how to feel. I hadn't practiced it enough. So my feelings would often come days or weeks afterwards. That was, and sort of, I had to work on learning how to feel in the moment.
Yes.
So it was just not what I had, to be honest.
No, and but I think there's something about when if understanding helps you to understand yourself, and you then understand why, that we talked about before, about triggers, or why you respond, or more to the point, react in certain ways, then the more awareness you have, the more then you can do something about it, or you can decide, maybe I need to have a look at that in myself, because maybe you get into relationships and triggers come up and they might have a negative impact, and you might be accused of things, but then you look back and go, well, actually that's not what I meant, but that's how it's perceived. And all of these things go to self-awareness, I think. And so in the back of the 1990s, I did a basic introduction to counselling.
Okay.
And just loved it so much, I just carried on the qualifications, and that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years or more, with teenagers primarily, because I had such an affinity because of what I went through.
Of course. So there was a transformation there. You also, at one point you mentioned your daughter in crisis. What was like, and how you managed that as though it was a job? Are you okay talking with that stuff?
No, I'm happy to talk about it, and actually grateful to talk about it, to be honest, Noel, because Gemma is 38. She's had alcohol addiction since probably 17, 18. It's been there. There is a very strong genetic predisposition on the paternal side and the history of that. But
had alcoholism, or your dad, or
no, my ex-husband's father, 6 of his 11 siblings, the mother's sister, and grandfather. So it's that, you know, as we know with addiction, there is a very strong genetic component.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you see, it was teenage years, as teenagers do. They go out, they get drunk, they go to parties, they get ill, all the rest of it. And there's an element of normality about that.
Yeah.
Where it was becoming an issue was the degree to which Gemma would take that drinking on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to drama school. While she was there, she got a part in Hollyoaks. And sadly, the drinking side of it finished that career.
Right.
Now, I could say all sorts of things, but we'd be here all day and night if I gave you a blow-by-blow account. But I and my ex-husband Richard took the decision to put Gemma into rehab, for us to put her into rehab. She never wanted to go, but we wanted to do that to try and save her life. And we did it 24 times. And every single time she came out on the day of discharge, she relapsed.
Right.
Now, she will say all the time she was there, she was driven by anger. How dare you put me in this place? I don't want to be here. I want to carry on drinking. And if someone asked me, would I do the same again? The answer is no, I wouldn't. Okay. Because I've become to understand more about the addiction side of things. Okay. Gemma has been what we call the revolving door patient, probably over 100 admissions to A&E. Mm-hmm. In intensive care 4 times. There are times when we talked before about going into survival mode, is actually making sure she didn't die. And the biggest challenge for me is being as a mother. Yeah. Because I've gone to Al-Anon, where they families of alcoholics. I've gone to the different rehabs and sat and listened on family therapy sessions. And the tough love side was so hard for me to do. And even to some degree understand, because by nature and by career, if someone is unwell, you don't walk away from them. Mm. You help them. And yet their argument to me would be, but you are helping them by throwing them out or doing all, you know, this sort of tough love aspect. Now, I tried and it didn't work. And someone would say, well, you didn't try hard enough. I didn't try hard enough. What are you saying? That I wasn't consistent enough? Probably the fact that Gemma got raped and other things happened to her. I couldn't cope with that, Noel. I just couldn't. I just couldn't. So what was the effect that it was having on me? I was becoming ill as well as a result of it all. And it was just perfectly obvious that Gemma just didn't want to stop drinking, regardless of what happened to her. Yeah. So the situations became so traumatic that in the end, we had a psychiatrist involved. And one day I said, can I make an appointment to come and see you? Yeah. Because I don't know how to cope anymore with myself in this situation. And I did. And we talked about, I know you'll know about harm minimization. So
absolutely.
And the harm minimization is the only thing that stopped her from the revolving door patient and keeping her alive.
I'm going to sort of, again, do that sort of government health warning bit. So again, if you're a family member or you're somebody who's involved in addiction, your own addiction at the moment, this is triggering you and you're thinking about it. Again, there are lots of resources available, not so much for family members, I have to say. It's not unusual for me to come across people finding things like Al-Anon difficult because of the tough love, and they don't really want to take that approach, and I get it. And you can feel, as a parent, as a family member, as a loved one, you can feel very judged in those circles if you don't want to take that approach. And so I understand it. But there's other organizations like, for example, Drug Fam. I shall show you this is one of my proudest things, Drug Fam, if you can see it. I used to be on the board, and they sent me this when I resigned. I did resign, they didn't throw me out. But Drug Fam is a great organization that will help family members struggling with these issues, and they don't take such a hard-nosed approach. They're sort of more involved. I'm a great fan of harm reduction. There's a lot of evidence for it, whereas things like Al-Anon, I'm not putting it down because I go to Al-Anon myself. I had an alcoholic father, so but it can be that abstinence-based approach works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. That's
yeah.
And so really what we have to find in life are the things that work for us. And the thing that always works is what you did, which is get help for yourself.
I had to know.
It always works. That was a really smart move.
Thank you. Well, now that you've mentioned Drug Fam, I will investigate that. I'd like to. Yeah.
Really, really cool. A really, really good organization that work with people. Founded by a mum who one of her twin sons died from an overdose of drugs. And rather than go down a hole of despair, she did that transformation thing. And she set up this organization to help families. Isn't that amazing? What a story.
Absolutely. And so amazing. And quite genuinely, I will definitely investigate that. Yeah, for sure.
Volunteer for them, to be honest, Julia. They're always looking for volunteers. So there you go. You could do counselling for them.
But no, it doesn't stop, even though there's a control element now with my daughter. Every day, because as we know, whatever stage that addiction starts, then the brain development, and particularly the emotional development.
Very young when she started, so her brain would have been totally frazzled by the alcohol. And like literally, I was talking to family about this just before, and their son has significant mental health problems, psychosis, but also substance misuse disorder. And it is a disorder. It's not somebody just deciding to be bad or wrong.
No.
It's a disorder that they're not fully in control of. And we don't give the same compassion, I think, to people with substance misuse issues as we do. Well, in general, I think we're not that compassionate towards the mental health issues, full stop. We have a lot of people in the media, for example, saying you just need to pull yourself together, and they're snowflakes. The snowflake generation, it just infuriates me, that stuff, because it's absolute nonsense. That's from people who were brought up by dads who were traumatized by war, and so they don't know any better. They never learned, really. That's the truth. Those guys that are my generation saying it, who embarrass the hell out of me, I have to say. They're on television saying, just pull yourself together, you're a snowflake. I'm like, oh my God, that's appalling life experience on that person's background. But our message is very clear that these things are genuine problems that human beings have, and that we have to have a compassionate, thought out, health-based response to them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And sadly, with addiction, there is it's like they almost label you with such negativity, and they just all of it's my choice. If they only understood,
orders that you're still totally blamed for yourself, aren't you? And we'll take on board that self-blame as well, unfortunately.
Well, And then we know in addiction,
the harm reduction approach with the harm minimization approach, is it helping her to manage better?
it's helping her from the point of view of keeping her safe.
Yeah, there you go.
So from that, it's had a positive effect. But, you know, if people would just understand of the, you know, the diagnostics and everything that's been done, and you take images of the brain,
Yeah.
and you see the brain of someone who's addicted and who doesn't have that capacity to formulate and understand and process, which is all the accusations that are leveled at them. And it's just, well, you say, why don't you just stop? Do you know how stupid comment that is? Why don't you just stop? I mean, look at that idea.
Just cheer up. It's like you have to learn these skills of coping in a better way. All of us, confronted by these things. So I'm glad to hear that it is minimizing the risk to her, and good luck to her. But I'm also glad to hear that you managed to recognize you had needs yourself, and that's a really important message to get across to people. It's that old metaphor. It's what has become a metaphor, is that you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, don't you?
Yes.
Because you can't help anybody else if you're dying of lack of oxygen yourself.
No, you can't. And yet there is such a temptation, and I bet you've got so many listeners going, yes, but I only put the oxygen mask on when I was nearly without oxygen myself.
But that's right. Just put it on as soon as it drops down. If it doesn't drop, go and get one, for God's sake.
Yeah, I know. But you know,
to get across to people, you're much more effective as a human being in any situation if you're meeting your own needs first. And it's counterintuitive, isn't it? When your child is in crisis and you think they're going to die, you just want, all of us, we want to rush in there, forget about ourselves and sort them out. But you can't. You have to stop. You have to make sure that you're safe, that you've got the oxygen mask on, and then you can help. Otherwise, you are going to be useless to yourself and to them.
And not feel guilty, which I think is the other thing. That
I would challenge that. You're allowed to feel whatever you want as long as you do the right thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Get that.
Feel whatever. Just put the mask on and make sure you look after yourself.
Yeah. I'll go with that. No, for sure. Yes.
Consequences of it and the fallout, because you will definitely feel better. You know, emotional thinking is irrelevant in this time. You have to take the right action, I think. I'm aware of time. We are definitely running out of time. I told you this at the beginning before the show, that we just get caught up in these conversations. It's fascinating. But I want to get to Hug a Bug and how that came about and what that does. And I mean, I love the name. I've been looking at the website. It's wonderful. So tell me about the genesis of Hug a Bug. How did it come about and what is it about?
Well, Hug a Bug World is about helping all children to feel, to have that self-worth, the confidence and the resilience just to be themselves. And the reason it has been born, if you like, was because throughout my years as a therapist, regardless of age and gender, regardless of any of that, the words I heard more than anything was, I don't feel good enough. And it was the I don't feel good enough that was affecting that person in their life at that time when they were coming to see me, minimizing their potential in every area of their life. And I thought, what can I do about this at a significant time in a child's brain development? And so knowing that around the age of 3, children begin to be able to express themselves in words, so that the words that we use are highly influential and can really make a difference to that core belief system of that child. And so what we do is a combination of psychologically proven factors of attachment, association, and repetition, and put them together in books that we have with, so it's fun, but in the context there are various things that actually do resonate on a subliminal level, but also by using the toys and then the affirmation hearts, when they're all connected together, they start to have an impact on building new neural pathways, so that the child grows with what we talked about before, but positive internal dialogue, as opposed to the negative side, which they were not born with, but somewhere along the line they were given.
So I want to reinforce something here, and people should know this, a little thing you can go and do, because children are born postpartum. An infant postpartum has more brain cells than it needs. And if you don't engage with those brain cells, they disappear. That's what happens. And so just to see what this looks like, I want people who are listening to this to go and Google severely neglected child's brain. You know the pictures I'm talking about, don't you?
I do, yes.
And that you get these images that will come up, and they show you a healthy child's brain and a neglected child's brain. And the first things that you notice are the neglected child's brain is physically smaller than the healthy brain. And also there's great big black holes in the brain where there should be these neural networks that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Exist. And if we don't interact with children in the way that you're suggesting, what happens is that their brains don't develop to the same size, and they also don't develop at all. And we end up with very damaged children. That's an extreme example. What I'm saying is, and what you're saying is, that in our interactional styles, in the content of those interactions, we can form positive self-images or negative self-images in that child from a very, very early age. And this is all proven neurological scientific fact.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We know how to do this. It's not complicated. It's not difficult. The tools are really simple, but we're still, as a culture in Britain in particular, we're still obsessed with this notion of, well, it didn't hurt me. Well, it did hurt you. I'm here to tell you it did hurt you. And you need to learn from these psychologists who have the evidence, who can demonstrate that if you give a child a really core sense of self-worth from an early age, they conquer the world.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that's what Hugabug World is all about, Noel. And it's also, you know, some people say, oh, well, my child hasn't got mental health issues. I said, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about normal development that you, as a parent, caregiver, grandparent, whoever you are, can influence that child's core, at the core of their being, what they believe about themselves, which will be there forever.
So it's a legitimate question. Does this work stop people from having psychotic mental illness? No, it doesn't. But what it will do is that it will mean that the structures that are the substrate of that psychotic experience are more stable.
Yes.
So that person is more likely to get the help they need and manage their condition more effectively. Okay. It won't stop people from having horrible life experiences, but it will mean that they're more pro-social and will seek help at an early age, will understand what is bad and what is good intuitively, and will gear towards what is good and pro-social, and their sense of self will be strong enough so that they will know when something is wrong and they will know when something is right. But because you will have engineered that into the fundamental fabric of who they are as a person.
Absolutely, Noel. I love the way you've explained that, because it's so important. And you can just, you know, you have this little being who's developing, and you have the capacity to influence that development, you know. And why wouldn't you want to do that in such a positive way that that child can thrive? You know, we always hear about academic ability. The focus is always on the academia side such a lot. And I remember when I worked in a boarding school, actually, that we had very clever children, but emotionally, you know, there were cracks there.
Go and take a look at Parliament. You can see the results of that, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Bojo, great. You know, here we go. Sorry, but
you know, but really, have you got
all of that stuff? But again, just thinking about that, and this is a neurological fact, that the work that Julia's talking about will lead to more effective academic ability anyway, because academic ability is literally spare capacity in your brain from the fact that you socialize really well. It's literally that. Okay. Yeah. The only reason we have higher functioning, creativity, language skills, not language grammar, but the words, the lexicon. The only reason that we have the mathematics, etc., is because there's spare capacity in our frontal lobes, and the only reason our frontal lobes develop in the way that they do is because we're social animals. And so this spare capacity is generated, and kids that are emotionally secure, that are pro-social and have strong social networks will automatically be more effective academically than kids that don't. It's what happens is you see these very odd people who are antisocial and clever, and they're strangers, they're outliers.
Yeah.
Vast majority of people that are clever because they're also pro-social. That's what we know as a fact.
Yeah. Yes.
So if you want a successful academic child, you invest in their emotional capacities. Their pro-social emotional capacities will lead to them maximizing their academic abilities. And we still don't get that in most of our academic and institutions. Just don't get it.
That is exactly, and that's why one of the things we're trying to do is work within schools on their PSHE, curriculums, because we've correlated a lot of what we do in order for them to actually really understand as 1 hour well-being a week is not enough. You need this, what we do. Well, we can do this every single day, just in every interaction that we have.
So really important that the well-being is not a curriculum subject.
Exactly.
Things that you do, it's a series of actions that produce well-being. And if you produce well-being, then you are more effective. And we know that. If we look at industry, every single organization in our sort of world at the moment is investing in the well-being of staff because they're more productive. It's the same at school. You invest in the well-being of your kids, they're more productive. Simple equation. Simple one-to-one. How do people get hold of Hugabug?
Hugabugworld.com is the website. And on that website is all about us, what our ethos is. And we've got, like Bella Bee here. Bella Bee is about being brave. And inside Bella Bee's tummy is a little heart, and out it comes. And the children can hold this. So when I go into schools, I always say to the children, first of all, just to get their attention, I say, guess what? I say, I've got you a present. Of course, who's not going to, what is it? And it's always a heart with an affirmation on that goes together with one of the characters. And then along with this, we have one of the books. And what's very important for us is that we don't leave the person who's reading the book out. So there's an introduction. There's also about how to get the best from the book for your child and how to use it. And then there are lots of activity sheets on the website, which are totally free, which they can correlate with, they can download, have at home. And the other thing we do is support the parents.
Brilliant.
I'm very, very pro supporting parents with their own emotions.
Right now, as soon as this show finishes, get to that website. In terms of you as a sort of psychotherapist, do you still work as an individual practitioner as well? Can people get hold of you, or are you mostly caught up in Hugabug world?
To be honest, Noel, I occasionally will do a counselling session, mainly with people who I've helped before. It's very rare that I would take somebody new on, just purely by the fact my passion to help the children and do as much as I can is my daily motivation. So, but on the website, if anybody has any questions relevant to what we've spoken about today with regards to myself or anything to do with the children, then please do get in touch because we will respond.
Great. On that note, we're going to leave it there. It's wonderful to know that your organisation exists. It's fantastic to hear your journey, Julia, from that little kid that was had to stand on her own 2 feet too soon, to somebody that's teaching, changing that completely. You've stopped it. It stops with you, and you're helping people sort of produce wonderfully sort of core, sane, happy, integrated kids, which is all the better for the whole of the world, to be honest. The more we invest in children, the better the world is, without a doubt, you know.
Yeah.
And so thank you for coming on. People know how to get hold of you. We're going to have to finish there for this show, folks. We could go on for hours. I want to send my love to your daughter as well. Well done on her and her courage for trying to deal with what is a very complex and difficult sort of disorder to have. So my heart goes out to her as well, and I wish her all the best in her journey. And if you've been triggered or upset by anything that's come up during the show, I sort of think good. You know, it's important that you listen to that and that you find your oxygen mask, folks.
Absolutely.
And go and get the help that you need. If you're a child and things are happening to you that are not good, that are not safe, that make you feel bad, I want you to go and get help immediately. I want you to call Childline. I want you to talk to your parents. If it's coming from your parents, I want you to find your teachers to talk to. If it's happening from your teachers, I want you to talk to another adult, maybe a friend's mum or dad. Keep asking for help until you get it, kids. Don't give up. It's really important. We're going to leave it there for now, and I'll see you all in the next show. And I just want to say bye-bye for now. Thanks so much, Julia, to have you on.
Thank you very much, Noel.